Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Hoover Institution's D.C. office. My name is Mike Frank. I'm the director here, and more importantly, I guess, is I spent 2 years roughly working for House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and we want to welcome him today. And we're going to have a discussion broadly about regulatory issues and the economy and some of the importance of that. But first, as we get started in this conversation format, I just wanted to ask the leader and point out that recently, since the election, he's given some speeches. He's addressed the broad question, which is related to today's topic, that Congress over recent years has seemed to have fallen to no longer being a co-equal branch of government with the executive branch due to a lot of activities at the executive branch level. And he's expressed some frustration with that. And a lot of those issues seem to come up most prominently in the regulatory arena, which is today's topic. And I want to give him a chance to elaborate a little bit on, from his unique perspective as leader of the House, how that manifests itself, what it means day to day, and what you think down the road we can be doing to try to restore the House and the Senate to a co-equal status with the executive branch.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you all for coming out early in the morning. If it makes you feel better, I'm still on California time, so. I think what has happened in the last little bit, and it goes past, I would say, even this administration stretched it well beyond. But the Article 1 of the Constitution, we started this country with 3 co-equal branches. They're no longer co-equal. And that's really a threat to the economy, to the Constitution, and to the people. And we're taking kind of like a two-pronged approach. I'm a firm believer that structure dictates behavior. So you have to get the structure right, otherwise you'll get the same behavior and outcome as it goes forward. So if you watched on the floor, right now we're populating the committees, but we're still moving legislation on the floor. And what did we focus on first? Article 1, midnight rules. Since the election, think about it, just since Trump got elected in November to January 5th, this administration has proposed 145 new regulations. $16 billion worth. I think 35 of them are major rulings. The definition of major ruling is cost $100 million. And if you look from the CBO report, they have enacted 82 new major rulings every single year for the last 5 years. That all perpetuates upon itself. But the other element that happens is, when you think about this, moving the Constitution away. So we changed the structural debate of Washington. Midnight rule, Reins Act. You all know about Reins Act. No major ruling can go in effect without a vote of the House and the Senate. Why? Because the people then get a voice. Do the people have any voice when it comes to the bureaucrats? Even when election is held, they can't fire them. Somebody in the VA lets a veteran die. EPA goes and takes your private property. You know, where is the check and balance in that scenario? And then the next fold is looking at, and this is where Congressional Review Act comes in. Mm-hmm. It allows us to go after those new regulations that have gone in for the last 60 legislative days. And because you're in a campaign year, you can go back some distance. It allows you to bring that regulation up and only have to have 51 votes in the Senate. So, but those do not become privileged until January 30th. So watch when it comes January 30th and for the next 2 weeks what we go after. I think stream buffer rule. How many jobs have been lost in the coal industry? Every single entity. How many have gone bankrupt? Not because something they've done wrong in their business or made a bad investment. Simply imposing government came on them with a regulation that they had no choice. Look at what we passed yesterday, regulatory accountability. It says in there, government should pick the one that costs the least, right? If it achieves the same goal, costs the least, brings transparency, then what is key, I believe, is what Radcliffe has, the Chevron deference. Even though, okay, here's a regulation, I'm going to go to court, but even though I go into court and I walk into the courtroom and she has a blindfold above her head, across her eyes as I walk in to go to the court, it's not that way. because they give deference to the agency. That takes the deference away. So you level the playing field. To me, if we want to move this economy, there's three major pillars: healthcare, tax reform, and regulation reform. And we are starting with that right now. Article 1. You saw midnight rule that allows you to combine all these that Obama's doing at the end and put them, instead of going one by one, grab them together. That takes 60 votes to get through the Senate, though, as we go. REINS Act that changed the structure of the future so we won't be back in this place. And then a Congressional Review Act that allows us to go after those that are currently being imposed in there to get a level playing field. Look, you'll see stream buffer. You'll see methane going on to federal lands, imposing. And then in the labor, they have this blacklisting. Have you heard about what they imposed in there? Fortunately, it's been stayed because of the Texas court. They want you to self-report any problems you may have had, and they'll determine whether they blacklist you from getting any contracts with the federal government. Do you get any due process there? None. And that's what I talk about, the encroachment of losing your constitutional rights, losing your due process, and then empowering one side from the Chevron deference, from no feedback, and, to me, lack of people having a say in this. Elections, people have a say. I love this last election, regardless of where you thought of where you were. It didn't matter what you thought the television wanted to impose on you. The people rose up and made the decision. That just shows how our system works so well. And I think that is where we have to come back to.
Let me ask you one related question there. In previous Congresses, when some of these items came up for votes, the votes themselves had some bipartisan aspect to it, but not very much at all. Well, in one sense, the shoe's on the other foot now, and some of these reforms to reestablish the congressional equality relative to the executive branch would be coming to in a Trump administration instead of an Obama administration. Are there any of your colleagues on the Democratic side who are taking a fresh look, maybe at the need to rebalance the branches?
A small group. We had like 3 within the REINS Act, but I think you're going to see more as it goes. And really, from a point of looking at the House, Senate, or looking from a legislative branch, you want to get to 3 co-equal branches, regardless who's in that administration. It's the protection of the Constitution, protection of the people, and really, it's for the economy as well.
Well, let's talk about a couple of other aspects of this. You've talked about the kind of the government-wide reforms to the Administrative Procedures Act, the REINS Act in that, the Chevron deference rule, and so on. What about other tools that the House could use? Appropriations process, oversight. Is there any kind of concerted strategy to reassert that authority in the context of the tools the Constitution gives?
Well, a couple ways. Appropriations, if we get that working correctly, that is a check and balance it among itself. And I think you're going to find that in this cycle of getting to that point. Secondly, if you look at our rules package, we did something different. We brought back the Holcomb Rule, which allows any member to go into an agency. Before, this got changed in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was there, and he was getting, Republicans weren't in the majority, but they'd get these conservative Democrats, and they'd go into these agencies and make fundamental change. So you had a voice in there. This allows any member. Every member's elected almost in an equal basis of your district, somewhat equal. Those people should have a voice. It shouldn't just be one certain committee. So we put it in for a year to test this as a pilot program. And I think that brings a little more power back. And that's Republican or Democrat alike.
And along those lines, one of the things that I've seen happen in the past when a new administration comes in is that there's sort of a honeymoon period where acts of the previous administration might be viewed favorably to reform those or unravel them. But there's some point where the appointees in an executive branch agency start to become kind of territorial, and they start to think, well, if you're criticizing something that happened in that agency, even if it was 2 or 3 years earlier, they get all self-important and defensive about it. Do you think there's a way to enable the 2 branches to work together? If you're going to drain the swamp, you probably need 2 to tango, right? Is there a...
Yeah, and I look at, when you think about draining the swamp, to me, taking power away from people is the swamp. Anything that imposes what the strength of our republic is, the power of the people. So when you have bureaucracies and you have no touching of the bureaucrats, you got to drain that swamp. When the federal government can impose upon you, take your private property, do others, that's the swamp you need to drain. I've been very impressed that the individuals have been selected to be in this cabinet. And I've sat with a number of them. And I think they have seen the actions against the industry at the times. I think we're going to have a fresh look and a fresh approach. And I think that's going to be very healthy. And I believe on both sides of the aisle you're going to have people willing to work with them to drain that swamp, because in the end, that's not a partisan view. That's really letting the people have the power, the public. And when you look at the President-elect Trump, I think if you're trying to find his principles and his philosophies, that's where it rests, going back to the power with the people.
Shifting gears a little bit, also on the economy, though, there'll be a lot of energy devoted to a reform of the tax code. Is there anything you'd like to say about how you, from the perspective of being House leader, views that process, and maybe in your mind how you might define what a successful tax reform effort would look like?
Key element when I said the three pillars, we have to have growth. Growth will help solve so many of our problems. We cannot simply solve it by this status quo. When you look at this last election and the anger from within, it becomes the disparity that's happened in this country. The middle class is worth less today than they were 8 years ago. They lose hope in the perspective of where they can go. It goes against everything that America has thought. Every generation has improved on the generation before them, but 3/4 believe the next generation will not. So to me, that's part of draining the swamp and others. So a tax code that would be successful should be simple. Simplicity, right? That means fairness at the same time. The more you allow all these different deductions, what is that? That's just people to come in and lobby for a special deduction go. If you make it simple, I fly every week back and forth on an airplane. But I don't assume the person sitting next to me, no matter what type of seat I get, paid the same price. We're all paying some different price. That shouldn't be in America, right? And the simpler that it fits on a postcard, the fairer the process it is. It has to be growth. You got to have growth in this economy. And when we get growth back, it levels the playing field for everybody to be able to rise up. And when I look at what Kevin Brady is starting with, and when I look at talking to, we're going through listening sessions right now, Kevin Brady and I in the office, members are fully engaged in this. And it takes away a lot of the different arguments. Do I win and get a special deduction for my little industry that I care about? Or do I put a level playing field, and that means letting America be competitive with the rest of the world? Right now, structure dictates behavior. We give you the highest corporate rate. We tell you it's a world economy, go compete. But if you sell something overseas, we're going to punish you if you bring it back and invest it in America. I mean, repatriation. I think if you can fit it on a postcard, home deduction will stay. Remember, we make policy in the world of politics. Charitable deduction should stay. I'm a firm believer in that. Why? I believe in limited government. And I love to direct where my charitable contribution go. Why? Because it go right in my community, solve one of my own community problems, and it won't take as long. Somebody needs a problem, I can give to the mission right there, and they can fix it, right? To me, that is helping solve problems without government being involved and letting an individual direct where it goes. I think those two type of things should stay.
Okay. There's other items on the agenda that are being discussed pretty vociferously. A large infrastructure package, for example. Even though it's not directly related to the economy, there's talk of refurbishing the Navy, new aircraft carriers, nuclear sites, and so on. More generally, any other items that are coming down in the pipeline that you think are worth mentioning in the context of reviving the economy, such as maybe those items?
Well, I stick to the pillars. So you have your health care. If we did nothing on health care, Obamacare is collapsing. It created 23 co-ops. It gave them more than $2 billion, and 18 of them already failed. The premiums continue to rise. But you know, a more concerning issue about all this, well, your deductible is so high that if somebody has it, they don't want to use it if you talk to them, right? There are roughly a little over 3,000 counties in America. 1,022 of those counties only have one choice. There's no other option available. So you talk about limiting individuals, and if you push everybody onto Medicaid, how many doctors actually take Medicaid patients, right? Is it roughly 10% or so? I mean, you're taking away power from the people to choose from their health care of where they want to go or have choice inside the market. So if you do nothing with Obamacare, it collapses and provides us less health care.
So that's the baseline.
Yeah. And then think economically. I've got story after story because of the 50-employee rule, how they cut the hours or they cut employment. So now it's left jobs for people to have, less income that they can have. So to me, that's an economic issue and a health care issue the same. Mm-hmm. We talked about bureaucracy. I think that's unshackling. You'll get a great deal of investment and more going through for growth. Tax reform provides us growth. But infrastructure, I think, is one where President-elect Trump has really looked at. Now, I look at it from a perspective of this. Yes, we have to invest in infrastructure. But what I want to see coming forth, I want to see reforms. I want to see public-private partnership, getting the synergy of that. We've seen many states be able to do this and get a greater outcome. Also, I don't want to vote on building a new bridge or a road and wait till my children to see it actually start being built. The time frame is frustrating, right? So we need to streamline. And I also want to think differently than it's just bridges or roads, right? What investment do we need to make? Why does the Canadian air system controllers work better than ours? Where do we have to go to make the next century with technology? The more that government controls something, the less change it has, right? If you look at healthcare and if you look at education, why are they slow to innovation? Because it's controlled by more government. I mean, why is in the VA system that people can't even get an appointment? Why can't they have a simple app that a veteran can set an appointment, rate their doctor, rate their care? I mean, in today's world, think about you call on a phone to talk to somebody at the IRS and you can't even get them. But in the private sector where something can happen so rapidly? I mean, I was sitting with this young guy who created this healthcare provider rally. It lets you have everything simply on your phone. It tells you where you are in medical health age. It gives you incentives where it actually provides you money to go do something better. Maybe lose a little weight, maybe quit smoking. And it's letting you have the choice. There are other ways to doing this that empowers the individual and provides better care.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think at this point we have some time for Q&A.
Sure.
And I think I'll call on folks, and please just identify yourself for our benefit when we call on you. And we have microphones here as well. So think about your question, and when the microphones come, let's ask them. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Thank you. Lisa Lambert from Reuters. Given that we're talking about regulation and economic growth, are there any financial regulations or banking regulations that you feel are impeding economic growth and that you might put through the CRA on January 30th?
We're looking at a number of them now, and we haven't laid out that role, which ones yet. Those three, the blacklisting is the newest that people don't know about for there. But the Speaker and I have sat down with Jeb Hensarling just last night, talking about his Choice Act and looking at where capital is king, jobs are created. So much as what happened in Dodd-Frank, you push capital in other places. You try to eliminate all risk where you eliminate growth when you make that happen. You create an agency that's outside of the accountability of government, when I say with the people, because of the funding. I think there's a lot of areas there you're going to find some big reforms. And I firmly believe you'll get a lot of bipartisanship on that. Because if you want to see the country grow, you got to have people willing to take risks, people willing to have investments, but at the same time, you want to have some accountability in the process. I think that's all doable.
John.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Mr. Leader. I'm John Gizzi with Newsmax. And just since you mentioned, Mr. Leader, about the Affordable Care Act as a roadblock to free market and as a source of regulation, every time this is brought up at the White House, the president's spokesman, Josh Earnest, repeats the mantra that Republicans have no plans out there as an alternative. He said it just yesterday. And once and for all, this is being increasingly repeated as fact by people. What do you, as Majority Leader, say to that there are no plans out there?
Combination. We have numerous plans, numerous ideas. We put forth many times. What we've had is an administration that wanted to block or work against everything that we've done. We do not want to put in a system that people don't have input to. This is roughly more than 20% of the economy that they went and captured. And you want to just, boom, the next day? Getting the new administration in, I think it's critical that Tom Price becomes Health and Human Service, gets confirmed for that, and then you could sit down, having the new administration in, what are the numbers, where can you go? Because anytime you sit back and you read through the Affordable Care Act, it empowered HHS very strongly, the Secretary. So you need to work with. Prior to the end of last year, after the election, I sent a letter to every single governor and every single insurance commissioner, regardless of party. Give us your idea. There's not one person in the country that doesn't understand that Obamacare is collapsing. I don't care how much they try to spin it, the facts continue to show it. So let's have a system that everybody could have input in, despite the way they went and passed Obamacare. Let's create a system that works, that brings greater choice, and I think the best way to do it, if you look at, a better way, we laid out health care. But I think you go through the process, you have the hearings, you have input, so everybody has an opportunity. Why would you just want to jam something without having the regular order going through the process? I think that's healthier. I think you get better ideas, and everybody gets to have some ownership of it at the same time, meaning that you make a better bill.
So in terms of timing, there'll be a period of time for hearings, for gathering ideas and proposals.
Yeah, but you're going to see, even when you come to the repeal, we'll be putting in new changes for health care going forward. It's not like you have to sit and wait and have this one big bill with the others. You're going to have ideas, you're going to have legislation, you'll have some that already goes, that starts changing the direction of where we're doing with health care.
Okay. So there, and then we'll go to David.
Hi, Chris Knight with Argus Media. In the last Congress, you had votes to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. Now we've got the Dakota Access Pipeline that's kind of been delayed by the Obama administration. Is pipeline approval something that you're looking at in the next Congress to kind of, avoid this long permitting process needing to be restarted for Keystone or Dakota Access, or do you think you can leave it to the Trump administration to handle?
Well, the Trump administration, when they very first come in, and this is where the structure of power, a lot of that was done from an executive. Even though you go through the pipeline process, they went all the way through, they made all the checks, they went through all the court challenges, and then all of a sudden the president comes in and says no. Even though his own agencies said it was okay. So it made no sense. There are some things and elements that the Trump administration will be able to just do. I think when you go through the executive orders, he's going to be able to do many of those. But in Congress, even last year, we were doing streamlining of pipeline permitting. And I think that's key, because when you look at what has transformed America in energy, we can become energy independent. Technology and others of where we've gone, but the pipelines are a safer movement. And the infrastructure, to me, is key to be able to have that movement if you're ever going to get energy independent. So we've already worked on streamlining of pipeline permitting. We'll continue to work on that, but a lot of this will be able to be done with the change of a president.
David?
David Azar with the Heritage Foundation. I have a question about the politics of tax reform, not the economics. The mood in the country right now is somewhat populist with the election of Trump, and if we're talking tax reform, it's going to mean either corporate taxes or marginal tax rates for wealthier people. I think the lower 50% of Americans only pay 3% of federal taxes. How do you square the mood of the country with the fact that tax reform the left is going to say benefits the wealthy?
Well, I think you're going to see overall tax reform. That's why, to me, I start out with fair and simple. If it is on a postcard that you can fill out your tax return, I think people will say that's much different than we've seen in the past. And a sense of fairness, to me, is kind of a principle in America. And if you want to talk politics, I think that's the strongest, no matter where you fall in the political spectrum. All right, it's fair. That could be a good tax plan. If you make it not as complicated, simplistic, more simpler in that, simplifying it. Instead of a lot of rates, what if you lower it to 3 different rates? I understand what it is. I understand how much I made. I understand what I should pay in taxes. But I also understand the person over here that made that is going to pay the same as I did. They don't get an advantage over me. To me, in a political spectrum of where we are in America, I think that would be the power of actually moving it. Now, that tax code that you change, though, and you make it overall, has got to be about growth, because then they'll feel what's happening in this country.
Dennis here in the front row.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I think bringing hope back is a great idea. I was just thinking about bringing hope back in the out west, where we have got all these federal lands. And when the last administration came in, they essentially hung a closed for business sign on the door of all the western lands, timber, mining, grazing, everything. They're trying to knock down dams that create hydroelectric power and whatnot. And I'm wondering if you all have a thought about how to move forward, put it open for business, because we talk about jobs and growth, but we've got sort of west of Denver, there's sort of no hope that we're getting back on the right track.
Well, one, in the CRA on methane, that really goes to federal lands. And when you say federal lands, it's really a war on the West. There are numerous things you see as they're going through. And this is where bureaucracy and the regulations. I mean, think for a moment. The Federal Register is, what is it, 97,000 pages? That's what?
Have you read them all?
How many King James Bibles is that now?
Yeah.
What is that about? Is it 400, 800? I forget the number of how many. It goes beyond. And most of that is imposing upon and shackling up resources that we have that we can manage in an environmentally sound way, get an economic growth. It brings greater growth to that state as well from a tax code system and others. But I think it's a way, if we think creatively, the federal government will get royalties at it, we'll get economic growth, and we'll get environmentally sound land that we can enjoy.
Right there. Oh, sorry. You next.
Thanks. Dave Weigel, Washington Post. You were talking about messaging before it came to taxes. On Obamacare, one powerful message to Republicans was that Democrats reformed everything, a giant entitlement reform with no Republican votes in the end. Right? They won in one part of the process. So what's going to be the rebuttal if Democrats deny their votes in this process?
Well, I think once you go through, if you look at what's happening in Obamacare today and you look at some of the votes that we've had on the floor and elements of Obamacare, you've had strong bipartisan votes. To me, I don't look at it as a repeal and replace. I think it's relief and rescuing, right? We're rescuing because it's collapsing upon itself. If people are being withheld jobs and hours because of what Obamacare has imposed on them, if the deductibility has gone so high that they can't use their health care in the process, if you have 1/3 of the country that has no choice and only has one plan out there, you're taking away options for them. If you have premiums continuing to go up, which they have seen, the administration's even said 25% within. You've seen others that are much higher. People who are promised to keep their doctor, they can't. So you have to rescue them from that. You can't sit back and play politics and say, just sit here, let's see it collapse, and we sit there and say, we told you so. So once it's rescued, why would anybody sit back and play politics then? And if you have a structure that we're welcoming everybody to put the ideas in the process, wouldn't you want a system that works right? I mean, I believe in the very best of people. Regardless of what party you stand in, I hope you run for office because you want to go through to make the country better and you want to put your ideas forward. But I also understand, regardless of what party you're in or what happens in the outcome, our system is based upon you're going to get compromised. You know, we happen to be in Washington, D.C. The reason why this is our capital is because it was a compromise to set up our banking system. You know, fundamentally think about the structure of what we have. So I think if people want to play politics with it, I don't think the American public will sit back. And then we got to give them the relief of a system that actually works.
Wait, this gentleman right over here.
Majority Leader David French with ENS Resources. Last year, you were successful in taking a bite of that apple related to Western water policy.
That was pretty good, wasn't it?
It was, as you said, it's a good first step, and that you wanted to come back this year and take another bite. Would that bite include regulatory reform, ESA, somehow trying to address the 100 million plus dead and dying trees in the Sierras, which are destroying our watersheds? How do you see that moving forward?
I think we have to look at all of it because what's happened within those forests and the fires we're getting out west, the compounding of what's going on, this is a place that President-elect Trump understands. When he campaigned in California, he knew he wasn't going to win California, so he didn't campaign a lot. But when he came out and through, the issue he talked about was the water issue. In California, it's defined as whiskeys for drinking, waters for fighting. But the concept that, it always amazed me as I sat down, I've worked on this issue from the day I came into Congress. And many times I got close with Dianne Feinstein and just didn't get there. But Dianne Feinstein and I and the rest of us came to an agreement. And we stayed with it. Now, Boxer fought it very strongly. And in essence, it's just one step. As you read the reports of California getting this rain and the snow and you're getting mudslides and otherwise, because we had such drought, the water won't absorb, so you're getting so much at one time rushing out. But we haven't built new dams. The return on investment just to raise the current dams we have is a great investment. But we've been studying it for decades. So they stop it by government from happening. Now when the water comes in, because you've got the northern snowpack, the Central Valley where we grow the food for the world, and the population in the southern, you've got to be able to move the water down. If you don't, where does it go? Out to the ocean. And they come to me, well, why don't we invest in desalinization plants? I said, okay, well, we put millions of dollars of high energy to take salt water to make fresh water. I'll do that the minute we stop making fresh water salt water. I think looking at and planning for the future, storage, movement, I think it has to be common sense ESA. But in a new administration, I think they'll look that way. There's a lot of things that are being done, even though we had a biological opinion about the level you can pump, and this is all the bill did, allowed you to pump at the level, the high level they said you can pump, with all the time before they were pumping at the very lowest level. Why? Just because they wanted to. That wasn't common. Otherwise, the water was going to the ocean. So I think this whole concept of the war on the West, we've got to sit down, put an overall plan together, and I think from bureaucracy, from the way you can do regulations, that you actually have a voice in the process, a check and balance, we'll stem some of that in the future, but look at what's done in the past that we can change.
Woman in the back.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My name is Elvina Nawaguna. I cover energy and the environment with CQ Roll Call. My question is about the renewable fuel standard, which appears is being pulled in different directions in Congress with corn state lawmakers against oil state lawmakers, and then you have Scott Pruitt, who has both written against it, but also promised that he would uphold it. And then we have the president being advised by Carl Icahn, who does not like it. What direction do you think it's going to go?
I think you'll see some change to it. I'd leave that up to Energy and Commerce. I don't want to dictate what will come out of committee, but I would sit down with the new chairman, Greg Walden. There's been discussion for quite some time, but I think it needs reform.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Front row.
Hello, I'm Alexia Campbell with The Atlantic. It sounded like you were not too thrilled with the idea of spending on infrastructure. Is that something that you think might not get through the House? Is that something you're going to oppose?
We need infrastructure, but I also believe, let's not forget our deficit. I'm a fiscal conservative, and I believe that the size of the deficit is bad. We've got a lot to invest in, but there's private-public partnerships that you can. I want to see the return on the investment. There's some things that can be done that if you streamline others that people would move through. I don't know of any plan that is currently out there, but I want to see what we want to invest in, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to pay for it, just as I would do with any other bill someone proposed before me.
Any more questions? John Burlow in the back.
Yes, John Burlaw, the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Mr. Leader, thank you for speaking to us. One of the places where some slight progress was made, at least as far as legislation, and that you were involved in, was the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act in 2012, the Jobs Act, and some of that was self-executing and actually has been successful, has made a difference. But other parts, like equity crowdfunding for smaller firms, has been slow walked by the Obama SEC, and there seems to be some agreement that even you could debate the merits of Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank, but that smaller public companies or smaller companies should not be subject to rules as if they were Fortune 500 companies. So do you see that as an area of legislative progress, and how do you see the Trump SEC, once he gets his majority there, dealing with these issues?
Well, this is what I'm talking about, draining the swamp. Here you have a Jobs Act that get passed by the House and the Senate, large numbers, signed into law by the President, and his own administration will not enact it. So who has the power and who has the voice? Do the people? And how can you change the bureaucracy there? We had to come back and pass a bill again that restates what we already passed and made law because they would not do it. I want to see an SEC that works for the people. And to me, we've created something Patrick McHenry called Innovation Initiative. Any of you know what the terminology of a gazelle is? Gazelle is a small business startup that grows at 20% a year or doubles every year. It accounts for 4% of all new startups, but it accounts for 70% of all new jobs in the startups. And what Jobs Act did was unshackle the ability to people to take some more risk, find capital in other places as Dodd-Frank collapsed around allowing more capital, but it also allowed people to invest too and take some risk, give the chances others. In our Innovation Initiative, we took it from the premise of the Jobs Act. We passed more than 20-some bills last time. On average, the vote was 362 from all different elements. And all that is making Congress to start thinking about not what America looks like a year from now, but what would America look like 50 years from now? And where can we unshackle and get this innovation growing and moving? Because as you do that, more jobs are created. When you look at the workforce in the future, current report came out that 65% of the kids in school today will be in a job that doesn't exist today. So either America is going to lead on this, or we'll be behind. And what frustrates me is when we create a structure that allows us to lead, we had bureaucracy stop it. And you had no ability to change that because you had your elected officials who went through the structure, voted, passed, not easy to pass, but passed it overwhelmingly, signed by the president, and a bureaucrat decided what's better for America in their view, and that was wrong. And that's why I go back to the core of the three pillars, and if you want to drain the swamp, it's bureaucracy in America that is going against the republic of the voice of the people that needs to be drained to unshackle and bring growth, protect our Constitution, and really power the people.
We have time for one last question, and we have any hands up? Chance to ask a question of the majority leader.
Oh, there we go.
Tim Kaine.
I always worry about that last question.
Well, yeah, you got to worry about this fella here.
Yeah.
Welcome to Hoover. I'm a colleague of Mike's here and an old friend. So great to have you here. Thank you for making time for us. I was going to ask, since nobody else would, I love the fact you mentioned the deficit, and your agenda is great, but a lot of these things cost so much money. Some of us think that without a balanced budget amendment, you never are really going to get Congress to make the hard choices. So we've got an exciting new president. He's willing to take some strong stands. Do you think we will see action on constitutional amendments to limit taxes, to cap spending, and to balance the budget?
You know, we have moved balanced budget a couple times since we've been in the majority. Problem is you don't get to the 2/3 that you need. I look at this election as a reform election, as a change election. And if you take it from a Republican, if I put a Republican hat on, only 2 other times in history since World War II have Republicans been in a place where the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And on average, they've only kept it for 3.5 years. I think the American public view this election as they want to see action, they want to see change, and structural change at that. And I think setting, as I say, structure dictates behavior. If you allow the continual growth of these deficits, when now the deficit is as large as your economy, every great society has collapsed when they overstretch themselves. And if every generation has proved on the generation before it, it's about the opportunity. We have big problems in this country, but we have great opportunities to solve them. If we do not have growth, we will not solve our deficit. We cannot just cut our way out of it. We have capped discretionary. But when Ronald Reagan was president, discretionary was 75% of the budget and mandatory was 25%. Today, mandatory is 66% and discretionary is 33%, on its way to be 75% in mandatory. So if we don't look at the overall budget, if we don't look at growth to get it up to 4%, you won't have the ability to solve it and pay down the debt as well. That's why the 3 pillars that we have talked about are key and structural to getting us back onto that path. And if you watched, ever since Republicans took the majority in the House, they have always produced a budget that would balance. We put it into balancing it within 10 years. And that's key. Because what happens is if you don't, you take away choice, you take away options, and you end up in a healthcare system we have today where there's only one choice. I see a good friend of mine, Larry Kidwell. He's from Tennessee. 3/4 of Tennessee only has one choice in healthcare. That's not America, and that's why it needs to be changed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.